have not read Playworld, I heartily encourage you to do it. It's a fun, ambitious, warm tour de force. I told Adam I gobbled it up. I have the fortune of a lot of time to read, and that's the way to read a book. And I really, really enjoyed it and encourage you to buy it and to read it. I think you'll enjoy it a lot. It's a great book. It's a very ambitious book. It's a big book, but you'll be glad it is once you read it. Adam, this is your third time here?
This is my second time here. I appeared here for Mr. Peanut in this store, in this site.
Okay, you were not here for ladies and gentlemen.
I'm not here for ladies and gentlemen.
Peanut was 2010.
Peanut was 2010, ladies and gentlemen was 2011.
2011, and here we are 14 years later.
Yes.
What have you been doing?
Well, I was raising 2 kids. And, I've raised 2 daughters, and I took over the Swanee Review, so I was also raising a literary magazine. And that job, I got that job actually the process of applying for that job began in 2015. It was like a 4-month process, and then I took over. And my editor at the time, Garrett Fiskajon, who was a regular at the Swanee Writers Conference, was pretty adamant that I take the job. And it was it's a jewel of Southern letters and American letters, but it did require a revamp. And so we did everything from redesign it to turn it into a paywall protected, modern publication, which now has a podcast. And so that was a very, very both challenging and remains an extremely fulfilling job, because I get to participate in literature at all times. But I was also working on Playworld. I mean, I started Playworld in earnest in 2014, and it's just not uncommon for me to be a little bit stop-start. I mean, I usually begin with a whole lot of gusto, and then I spend a lot of time in the woods, and then but once I figure things out, I can move very quickly. So that's what I've been doing.
Well, and ladies and gentlemen,
Middleman, child actor story.
Was that the seed?
No, it was actually not. There's actually a story in Ladies and Gentlemen called The Suicide Room, which is the first appearance of Griffin Hurt, the character, which is kind of a dark story. It's a funny story, but it's funny, yeah. And but Middleman was a story, and it's a much sunnier story about a child actor. It's a much more innocent story. Playworld, the idea for Playworld, the desire to write about my experiences. I was a child actor, and so my desire to write both about my life as a New York child actor, to write about the strangeness of that experience, because it's very strange, and it's also strangely boring, and then also to write, because it's not glamorous actually. And then also to write about what it's like to grow up around 2 performing arts people in Manhattan. People, a kind of life and career that can't really exist in Manhattan proper anymore. There's no such thing as middle-class artists in Manhattan. And my father, when I say had a very storied career, my father was somebody who worked with like some of the giants, like he was with Bernstein, with Alan J. Lerner, with Tom Jones and Harvey Schmidt. My father sang with Julie Andrews at Alan J. Lerner's memorial service. I mean, he's always been adjacent to that kind of greatness, and I just wanted to write about both a generation of creatives in Manhattan that no longer exist, and also a city that no longer exists. So Middleman was like the sunny take on things. This was a much more fuller and expansive take on things.
So it was not necessarily a deliberate jumping off point.
Absolutely, no, absolutely not. I mean, in fact, in the initial drafting of Playworld, I had said it when Griffin was 33 and his life was falling apart, I mean, in the novel, Griffin is suffering from certain kinds of trauma and abuse that in my initial conception of the novel was backstory. And I really loved the pages about Griffin in his early 30s when his life is collapsing, because whenever someone's life is collapsing, it's both sad and really funny. As Samuel Beckett used to say, nothing is funnier than unhappiness, and it's true. But when I started to embark upon Griffin's childhood in what I thought was going to be Act 2 of the novel ground to a halt. And it wasn't until I was talking to a friend, because I was stuck in despair, that I was like, hey, listen, I don't know how to get into this book. I mean, like, it's, and the person was like, well, tell me what it's about. And I'm like, it's about this terrible wrestling coach I had, and it's about what it was like being a child actor, and all these people telling me inappropriate things, all these adults telling me inappropriate things on set, because I was the only kid on set, and it was about like these weird relationships I had, and I was like, but it didn't seem strange at the time. And the person was like, that's a really good line. And then I came up with the first line of the book, which was in the fall of 1980, when I was 14, a friend of my parents named Naomi Shah fell in love with me. She was 36, a mother of 2, and married to a wealthy man. Like so many things that happened to me that year didn't seem strange at the time. And it was like off to the races. And that's so much about what writing a novel is. It's like, you have these things that are bubbling up that you want to say, but you can't find your angle of attack or your voice. And once I found that voice, the stuff that happened, what I thought was time present, got shoved to the back.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
It's about a child actor. 14.
14 beginning of the novel.
This is, and it takes place, y'all, in
1980.
Carter is going out, Reagan's coming in, and we were talking, here we are again on the precipice of an inauguration, and I don't know if it's prescient, but it was
with Carter going out and Reagan going in.
Yeah, right, exactly. When did you quit being a child actor, and why?
Well, so I quit. It's funny because Playworld, people are always like, well, how autobiographical is it? I quit being a child actor at 16, and the reason I quit being a child actor was really more inertial. And what do I mean by that? I mean that, like, I was working pretty regularly,
Making money.
yeah, and I'm like this close to a pension. All my friends in TV, I'm like, just make me an extra. Like, just I need to make like $5,000 more and I'll get a pension. But I was a very competitive wrestler. I was a very successful wrestler in high school, and the talk that I had with my father, just to give you like how like comparatively boring as real life is from fiction. I was like, Dad, I really want to focus on wrestling. And my dad, who was at the time like the voice of MTV, if any of you guys in the audience remember MTV, my dad was the guy who was like, MTV, music television. I mean, that was my dad. You know what I mean? Which was, and I will just say, just as an aside, it was kind of weird growing up with a father who was this person. Because, you go in to turn off your parents' TV and your dad, who was asleep on the TV, would be like, it's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are? You know what I mean? So it was like, he was like everywhere present and also visible. But, so I quit at 16 and without fanfare or drama. Yeah.
Or a pension.
Or a pension. I'm working on that. I'm working on that.
Are writers actors?
What's that?
Are writers
Yes,
actors?
yes. I think there's an element of that in that having my I started acting when I was 11. The first movie I did was an ABC after school special with Melvin Douglas and Barbara Rush, and the second movie I did was with Alan Alda, Barbara Harris, Meryl Streep, Rip Torn, and Melvin Douglas. And I'm just here to tell you, like, there are no greater raconteurs than actors. There are no greater mimics than actors. And part of what you do, especially when you live with a book for as long as this, is various characters have a vocal stamp. And you can walk around in the voice of some of those characters. And so you hear authors talk about this where they're like, I heard the voice of the character and it took over. I'm less magical about it than that. Like, I'm less woo-woo about it than that. But I could riff for a while. Like, there's a character named Al Moretti, who is a self-described Juwapi, half Jewish, half Italian. He's Al Moretti, I gotta do what I gotta do. And, you would just, I could walk around being Al Moretti and be like, I gotta say, I'm loving the outfit, Craig. It's fantastic. But I'm not crazy about the socks. And otherwise, you're fucking gorgeous. You can just be and that's where it's like, it's like the spirit takes over, and you can just kind of riff. So yeah. So yes, I think writers are actors to a degree.
Why don't you read some?
Sure. I'm gonna read. This is actually kind of the beginning of part 2, and the reason it's kind of good to read is you get to meet the whole family, and it's Griffin, our narrator, who is talking about this very specific kind of actor his father is, and then it leads to a dinner table discussion. So I'm gonna sort of jump, but it'll give you the whole picture. He's got this younger brother, Oren, and Oren to me is
one of my favorite.
Oren is like the truth dealer of the novel. Right. Oren is the one who sees through all the family bullshit and cannot shut up about it. I think y'all will get a kick out of this. My father's job title, actor, was a broad one, best defined negatively. He was not a television star, although he'd appeared once as a surgeon on the soap opera General Hospital. This was a bit part, a walk-on, in which he wore scrubs and a mask, the latter dangling around his neck, his character having just come from the operating theater to deliver news to the bereaved. In order to fully appreciate his line, you must imagine it spoken in his bass baritone, a rich, mellifluous instrument, almost British in its articulateness, but lacking any high-born lilt. It was a decidedly masculine sound, tonally cleansed of his outer borough idiom, Queens, as well as his mother's Russian and father's Hungarian accents, the pair squeezed, syllable by syllable, from his throat. It was only amplified by his diaphragmatic control, acquired at Juilliard, where he was classically trained in opera and enjoyed a full scholarship until quitting, mysteriously, after 2 years. His voice had a disembodied, disproportionate sound, which on first hearing could cause the listener a discordant shock, as when a demonically possessed girl speaks in the devil's basso profundo. "We've stopped the bleeding," he told the victim's wife, "but we won't know anything for certain until the morning." He was not a ham, but I would come to think he revered acting too much, with a love too big for small screens, so that his portrayal, even one as insignificant as this, was self-parodying, unwittingly genius, like a great actor brilliantly impersonating a bad one. It was not the first time a performance of his made me uncomfortable. Never once did he appear in a motion picture, but his voice did, as background noise in famous scenes. Acting was involved, of course, but off-camera, in a recording studio, dubbed in post-production, the lines improvised with other actors so as to create that familiar, indistinct din you might hear in a crowded restaurant, room tone being the term of art, or, as I came to think of it, trying to single out his voice from the others as we sat in a darkened theater watching, say, Day of the Dolphin, or Logan's Run, or any number of age-inappropriate films he took Oren and me to attend, Dad somewhere in the room. Not that my father didn't enjoy the occasional star turn. Some of his lines became iconic. He's the first man heard screaming from a window in Network, I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore. Look, you hear him say in Superman, up in the sky. Or perhaps most famously in Star Wars, these aren't the droids we're looking for. After that movie's meteoric success, it was not beyond him to tell a stranger who was curious about his profession that he had the pleasure of working with Sir Alec Guinness, that he was that stormtrooper in that scene, even though he'd done the dubbing months later in the US and principal photography had been shot in Tunisia a long time ago in what might as well have been a galaxy far, far away. Awesome. I'm saying, do you know how many people have been like, was that really your dad? Being like, these aren't the droids we're looking for.
Did you do United Negro College Fund?
No, because I'm very that's like a joke because a very famous black voiceover actor did that one. So that's like one of the it's like one of the in jokes. It's like, of course, this Russian Jewish guy isn't going to be the voice of the United Negro College Fund, you know what I mean? Or given the era, maybe a Russian Jew would be the voice of the United Negro College Fund.
Voice is a terrible thing to
voice. That's good. That's a good one, Claiborne. Claiborne, I like you even more. Fuck the socks, I love it.
The family is the same psychologist. Individually, not at the same time. And I asked a friend of mine who's a psychiatrist if that actually did your family do that?
But I assume your friend confirmed that used to be practiced.
He said it would have been unusual. He said it would have been difficult to deal with all the collateral information you had because I know everything about you, I know everything about Oren,
Yeah, and it wasn't uncommon in New York at that time. I had several friends. It was funny. My editor is in the audience, and he and I were with another Knopf staffer, and both of her parents were therapists, and she was like, "Yeah, we're the same age," and she was like, "Yeah, my father, they used to socialize with their Analysans all the time." Right. And of course, the assumption of that strangeness on your friend's part, is the assumption that everyone's telling the truth. Or telling what it's
their version.
Is their version. Right. So, but yeah, it would be tricky. To speak for the novel's characters, Oren, the younger brother, doesn't trust the process at all, and is suspicious and probably completely clams up. And of course, Griffin, the main character, doesn't really know what you're supposed to do with a psychologist. Like, what are you supposed to say? And so he reverts to, Griffin's sort of talent, and it's an unwitting talent. It's what makes him a good actor. Is he's so good at sort of masking who he really is that he is expert almost at disappearing and classic child psychology is the responsible adult mirrors back to the child, good behavior. It's like, oh, how do you feel about that? But what Griffin ends up doing is Griffin's really talented at mirroring an adult back to him or herself. So invariably, at least in the initial parts of the novel, the therapist ends up talking about himself. Elliot, yeah.
Great character.
Yeah.
Another character in the book is New York City. This is a New York novel.
Yeah. Yes.
That does not exist.
Correct. That's correct. Yes, we were just talking backstage about Nashville and the changes. I lived in Nashville since '95, and how protean cities are. And New York is one of those protean cities. Well, of course, Proteus is a Greek god. And the idea of being protean and mutable, that cuts right to the center of our most basic ideas of Western mythology, and so that's part of what makes New York this sort of magical place. There's the city you have in memory, and there's the city that exists right now, and they're palimpsestic, they overlay. And so really part of the idea to respond directly to your question of making New York a character was really to try to render Manhattan in 1981, which as an act of both memory and research, and really just trying to make the reader feel its particular dangers, its slants of light, the buildings that existed there that didn't, and even the way in which, like, the certain kinds of, weathers and wind currents that certain parts of the city created. I mean, there used to be, I swear, a way in which Columbus Avenue, because of the GW building and the New York Coliseum, was a kind of cyclonic wind experience. You know what I mean? Like, there was just a way where you would come to certain cross streets or certain roundabouts, as it were, in Manhattan, and it had its almost like own distinct weather. And so the idea was to, we thought about it thematically. The city that no longer exists, just like this family could no longer exist in Manhattan. So yeah, but there's also a mythological element. Griffin is into Dungeons and Dragons, and my editor and I, the other night when we were talking about all the statues in Manhattan and the way in which they sort of, in this kind of gargoyle-like fashion, keep watch over Griffin and are the only kind of characters in the novel, as it were, that keep watch over Griffin without harming him. And you as a kid in the city, I swear this is true. It sounds kooky, but it's true. Like, you become so intimate with some of these like mythological. Or they get mythologized, like, the New York City, for a New York kid, the New York City public library lions are magical. For a New York kid, the obelisk in Central Park is magical. For a New York kid, the Prometheus over Rockefeller Lake is magical. And so, but this is what's so fascinating to me about Manhattan. There are these enduring, symbolic works of art that emanate a kind of magical power. And then there's the experience every New Yorker has, and I think we've all had, where, you have a friend in town, you're like, oh, I gotta take you to this restaurant, I spent my life in it, and it's gone. And you're like, but it really was great. And so, but what's it like, what does it mean when the city that, where your childhood exists is not memorialized, right? Where it keeps disappearing under your feet. And what does it mean also, I grew up right near the Dakota building, where John Lennon was shot. That building has all kinds of magical and memorial valences for me, right? It does not for people touring Manhattan and just walking through. They might not even know of its very particular kind of history. Just like certain kinds of iconic multi-jillion-dollar towers now, like the Beresford in New York City. I grew up with friends who lived there, or in the Ansonia when it was like not a city of the super rich. What does that mean? What does it mean? What's that weird sort of palimpsestic overlay / way in which the city kind of disappears underneath you? So, I don't know, I think about this book, I think you might have said it. There's a way in which I sometimes think of Playworld as historical fiction, in a weird way. Because it does deal with some of these, it does deal with Lenin getting shot. It does deal with John Hinckley Jr. It does deal with Reagan and the Kemp Roth Act. There were just these things. Reagan's not a New York City-based thing, but just a way in which there are just certain central experiences to me that are so rooted in the place, but that place is gone, and that was just almost archaic. That's what I was trying to do.
It comes off. I thought that was a great part of the book.
Thank you.
New York. We're going to have questions. Is it time for questions? I have no idea what time it is. Where's Richard?
You're doing great.
Okay. Doing great.
So what are you working on now?
Well, right now I'm
You
working.
picking up a little seat?
Right now I'm working on Tool. I'm on tour, baby. You know, I'm on tour, and then when I come back early February from tour, we're editing the summer issue of the Swanee Review.
I wanted to ask you about that. So you're a writer and you're an editor.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever get confused about that?
No. But what I will say is that I've had the great good fortune in my career, both as a journalist and as a writer, to have fantastic editors. I mean, I was a staff writer and special projects editor at the Nashville Scene, and I had a fantastic editor there. Gary Fiske-John, the legendary Gary Fiske-John, was my editor for my first 2 books, and now I have Todd Portnowitz as my editor. One thing that you do end up learning when you're editing a quarterly magazine, and I mean, this is my 8th year at the Swanee Review, and I work with a team of editors, and my managing editor and I, Eric Smith, we train young editors, and we edit the crap out of the stuff that we publish, and we see how it's improved. And we see very clearly the steps the writers need to take to level up what they're working on.
They're blind spots.
They're blind spots. And so I go into the editing process with an extraordinary amount of trust. And I think Todd would be the first to say that, in the spirit of William Faulkner, I don't just kill my darlings, like I mow down my darlings. I move very quickly to, even though this is a long book, I mean, I do move very quickly to cut things that, if there's really a really, unanimous or strong sense that something needs to go, I'm just like, well, it doesn't behoove me to hold on to something, because probably if I'm holding on to it, it's more for me. I have a really, my favorite story about this, I'll tell you this quick story, but it's a really good one. In Mr. Peanut, there's this hellish hike that David, the protagonist, and his wife Alice take in Kauai. And even though I had been to Kauai and sort of knew the terrain intimately, this is so funny, I still did a lot of research on the flora and fauna of Hawaii and Kauai. And so, as happens in ways that are just, every writer screws this up, I just felt beholden to the research. And so I'm describing all this stuff and these kinds of, this plant and that, and this flower and that flower, and just sticking it all in. And Gary crossed out 2 pages, and his note in the side of the page was literally, this is what he said, he says, "I fucking hate plants." Sorry. The language is very French, but I mean, but my point is just that it was just and then I was like, yeah, I hate plants too. Why am I doing this? So that's really always been the object lesson. It's like, Adam, if you were a writer guy getting advice from you, and you knew editor guy was right, wouldn't you do well to take that advice? So.
And you cut over 40,000 words.
We did, and so Todd knows. That's why Todd's right there up front. Todd's actually 27. So, but that was before editing the book. But Todd did 2 major edits, and the first edit was he went through every chapter and he made suggestions for, block cuts, like scenes that had to go. And it was only by doing it in 2 passes like that then I could, after making some of those major cuts, that I could start doing, Todd could start doing what's called the line edit, and really looking at it on a sentence-to-sentence level. And what was fascinating was that then you do the line edit, and you'd see more things that didn't have to really be in the book.
Right.
Yeah.
You need to keep the momentum going.
Yeah.
And I never thought it flagged. I never thought, it's like you're in a movie and you're saying, this thing's going on too long.
I do want to say something about that. You know, it's so funny because I do think that, you know, as somebody who, I mean, I've been doing this for my whole life, in the sense of just, I've wanted to be a writer since, you know, really since I was a young adult. And I'm a gigantic fan of the big books. Yeah. You know, like I read all the King's Men for the first time this summer, and it annihilated me how good it was. And I read Edward P. Jones's The Known World for the first time this summer, and it annihilated me. And the thing is that those books, what those books have going for them, is a roominess. Is a roominess. And that's what the novel, the novel is a very particular brand of attention, right? And I do think, I don't mean this as like, I'm not speaking to any writer in particular, but I do think that there's been a weird way that time pressure and attention span has trickled into the novel in a way that sometimes I feel like emaciates the novel's possibilities. Because if you're going to sit down with a long novel, you know, I am the first person to tell you I think Moby Dick is one of the most remarkable pieces of American literature ever written. Part of the reason it is it's longueurs. You know what I mean? And by the way, as you get more familiar, again, I was just talking with Todd about this today, like I need to reread all the King's Men. Because that first pass at it is so tsunamic in the experience that, like, you know, you are in this mode of just like just kind of taking it all in. And there are just parts of it I just want to sit with. And so, you know, if Playworld is successful, I hope it encourages more novelists today to take a little more time and write longer books, because that's what the novel can do. And you know, I don't know. It kind of discourages me sometimes the way culture is a little bit upside down. And by the way, this is part of Playworld as well. Like, you want to know one of the crazy things about growing up as a kid in a certain age of media? Like, I'm going to make so many people nod right now, but remember when The Wizard of Oz came around on TV? And it was like a big deal.
Yeah. So,
you'd be like, oh my God, like, see it on TV, guy, you'd be like, The Wizard of Oz is coming, it's going to be on. And like, you made a point to wait for that thing, you know, or like, I was a big like Saturday morning movie watcher. It's like, oh my God, like King Kong versus Godzilla is on this weekend, like, oh my God, like, you know. So there was a way in which we didn't have entertainment at our fingertips. And so what that ended up doing is that changed our relationship to time. The novel is, to me, the last remaining form of aesthetic technology that can really change your relationship back to time. And so, you know, I still think it's like the coolest form. And also what it can do is the symphonic ending of any great novel, the way in which a novel can gather again, like that kind of wave-building force, just spending time with characters is, to me, is something that, I don't know, I bet you we'd have less anxious kids.
I used to be.
We can talk about that later.
I would get to the end of the book, a good book, and I would be sad.
Yeah.
You know, just like you wanted it to go on, you wondered what happened.
Well, yeah, and to me, a great novel casts a shadow. A great novel casts a shadow, where it lives beyond the frame. By the way, at the Sewanee Review, we actually, that's a built-in criteria for why we accept things. So we call it, the quality we call it stickiness. Stickiness. And stickiness is when, and my young staff will say this, be like, wow, that story was really sticky. Meaning, like, I've been thinking about it for days after I've read it. And, you know, to give you an example, I'll mention a great Knoxville/Western writer. You know, Cormac, when the Apache attack in Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian, there's this one moment where the Apache are attacking, where this horse bites, almost tries to bite one of the American soldiers. Like that lives with me the way some memories of my grandma live with me. You know what I mean? Like there's just a way in which, like, you know, and that is stickiness, and that is what art can do. Yeah.
Let's have some questions.
Adam, thank you for being here, and
Thank you.
just going along some of those threads. I mean, just any comments on just personally just managing those differences in mindset between being the defender of the novel, which may or may not, if I'm listening, be like the New York City of old disappearing,
Yes.
or not, and the editor of a modern publication and having to deal with all of those transitions as far as attention span, but still creating that emotional connection with those different delivery mechanisms.
Yeah, you know, I mean, in some ways, you just spoke to something I constantly obsess on, and you know, I sort of, here's what I would say about it, because I have a unicorn job, right? I mean, like, I do, and I'm very aware of that. I have 2 unicorn jobs, doing this and publishing the review. And the thing is that I know everyone in this room can sometimes feel like they're either alienated from our current culture, or the culture is exerting control over us, and we all feel this. I know this. But the thing is, and I do think the tide is starting to turn a little bit on this, like, but we are in control. And here's how we are in control, and that is the holy grail of all publishing. And I'm not really just getting on my super optimistic soapbox here, but that is this. It's like, it is word of mouth. It is taking the time, if you read something great, to then not share it in the sense of like, oh, I'm going to lend you this book and take it, or here's my edition, this one review, but give that as a gift. You know what I mean? Like pass, buy that book for a friend. And I'm not talking about my book. I mean, like, the importance of, like, just this, the really important thing of just, because you never know when somebody's going to connect. You never know when somebody's going to connect. And I know that for me personally, some people ask me, like, when did you decide you were going to become a writer? Well, I was obsessed with comic books as a kid. I was a scribbler. I was always sort of a storyteller. And because of my acting, I was around raconteurs. But when at 13, when my older cousin and I, he was a grown-up, and he was one of the good people as opposed to some of these people in Playworld, we read Dune together. We read all 6 books of Dune together. And the way in which he did it, and it was so beautiful. Like, he was like, let's cast this as a movie. And so for like over the course of the year, we read all these books. I swear I get emotional talking about this. Because, like, from then on, unwittingly, what did that inform? Did that mean at that point, at 13, I was like one of those, like, Rushmore kind of kids, like, and then I wanted to be a writer? No. What it did was, it informed my Dungeons and Dragons and the way I played. And then, I just, like, started copying things. And, like, those are the formative experiences. And so, to me, cultural control is local, and to be honest, I haven't been back to this store in 15 years, and I have very powerful memories about what it was like to read from Mr. Peanut here, and it was like one of the seminal experiences of my life, and so is this, and like, I don't know, protect this place, because you can never. Like, here's one of the things about, I'm really getting out of soapbox, I'm sorry, but let me just say this. We published a story last year, came in through our slush pile by a young woman named Charlene Bazile. Knockout story, it's called Tender. First thing she ever published. And she wins Best American Short Story. She ends up in Best American Short Stories. And it launches her career. We were the first people to publish Sadiq Fofana. If you guys haven't read stories from the tenants downstairs, Sadiq Fofana's first debut collection, he ended up winning a Whiting Award. He ended up winning the Gotham Prize. He ended up getting a massive deal with Simon & Schuster. He's a massive talent. And like, there is no measuring. Again, like when a literary magazine can live, it's just a small thing. When a literary magazine can live and people subscribe and share and keep it alive, there is no measuring its impact on the culture. Full stop. This is not like idealistic. It's just the case.
Thank you.
Someone else has a question. Come on. Don't be shy. I can answer this out already. Come on, Todd. I know you got a question.
I got lots of questions.
Go ahead.
I would just love to hear you talk a little bit about the wrestling side of the story, because we've been talking about all like the sort of the ideas and the kind of mental aspects of the book, but I really just to love to hear you talk more about the physical, because there really is real grappling and real descriptions of what happens on the mat.
Yeah.
And you know, I wonder how different it is to write such a physical scene versus like a scene of learning.
Thanks. So, the place of wrestling in the novel is, I mean, Griffin in the novel, he's 14 and he's not a very good wrestler. I mean, he's getting absolutely smoked in his early career as a wrestler. But thematically and really what's important for Griffin, what the importance of wrestling for Griffin is that it's the place where there is no dissembling, there is no acting. You are exposed and revealed, and so Griffin, there's so much integrity in wrestling. There's no script, and the outcome is unscripted. And so for Griffin, this is for him agency. Like this is for him. It's not so much that it is control, but it points to the possibility of control, and so he's obsessed with it. And when you write about that level of physicality, you have to toggle and do two things. Like, I'll put it to you this way. I have several women friends who are just fantastic writers, and they knew nothing about wrestling. And it's like their favorite sections in the book. And I really felt like I'd accomplished something because you're toggling between giving the reader enough technical information to understand what's going on, and also, but giving it, hopefully, propulsion. And so you just have to toggle between those two threads and those two lines of attack, and they're just my favorite. They really are like some of my favorite parts of the novel.
When Richard was talking about the book, recommending it, he said, I found myself reading 30 pages about wrestling, and I kept reading.
I don't blame some people if like their eyes glaze over on that part, but I mean, like I think also for other people, it's like some of the best parts of the book. And it was. I mean, again, it's an enormous challenge, but you're tasked with making the reader feel it.
Well, what makes it a great book to me is that I cared about Griffin. I cared about all of the characters.
Yeah.
Even cared about Naomi.
Yes. Well, again, you're supposed to look. I mean, like, so there are characters in this book that are doing terrible things. Like this is not a trauma plot book. It's not a book about. At one point, I think Griffin says really importantly, I do not think we are reducible to our traumas, or he says something like that. And because I don't believe that. And I also don't believe that, except with a few rare instances in history, world history, so long as we've been writing it, there are only like X number of people we can actually call truly evil, right? I mean, the idea being that, every one of these adult characters, again, it was a conversation Todd and I were having yesterday about some of the encounters with men in the book, where some of the initial encounters with certain men in the book between Griffin and some of the men are very prickly, and he bumps up against them, and yet at a certain point in the book he also finds himself learning extremely important things from them. And so he does have, for instance, he has an abusive wrestling coach. He's not abusive he's not he's physically abusing a lot of the guys on the team. But he says one of the most important lessons for Griffin's entire life, which is, and he's speaking about wrestling, he says, you've got to move. Like when you're on the mat, you've got to move. And Griffin sometimes gets stuck. And, I'm just a big believer that movement is our resting state as human beings, and that the greatest forms of misery in life come from when we drift from the fact that movement is our resting state. And so there's a way in which that takeaway for Griffin, and the way in which, when you think about some of the most important, conversations, the most formative conversations in your life, they're not the sit-you-down conversations where a parent or a mentor is like, well, you really did wrong. It's the glancing blow aspect, or the way in which, again, just like this is a city that no longer exists, and the recovery of that city is edifying in certain ways and makes you think wow, look at the ways things haven't changed and look at the ways that they have. Look at the various forms of look how, to all the parents in the room, look how free we used to be as kids. Look how free we used to be as kids. And yet here we are talking about how anxious our children are, how riddled with fear about things, how much parsing of, I'm not condemning this, I'm not trying to get canceled here, but how language has become such a central territory of self-definition over against when we were kids and we roamed the world. I mean, I grew up in Manhattan in the 70s. It was cortisol city. It was as dangerous as it ever could be. And yet my brother and I were moved through that city and dealt with crazy things all the time. And then you know what else we did? And I love to talk about this in these talks. Every night, we had dinner together. And I will tell you that I, with my kids now, my eldest daughter is in college now, but and my younger daughter's a junior, but we all know how hard it is to get our kids to have dinner now. It's crazy. It's so different. Why? Because they're scheduled up the ass. And again, this goes back to what I'm talking about with regard to attention. And then we're like, oh, kids today, they have no attention span. It's I wonder why. Could it be that we make them do more than we ever did? And we wonder why they're in a corner doom scrolling, because maybe that's their only chance to just be chill. Again, there's this comedian I love on Instagram who he's hilarious. I don't even know his name, but he talks about how when you grew up, when I grew up, we lived mindfulness. It's he says something you got on a bus, mindfulness. You know what I mean? All you were doing was riding the bus. It's the rivulet of water ran down the window. Mindfulness, you know what I mean? Now everybody's mindfulness. It's just different. And so, I don't know. I mean, gosh, if there's any discussion I want Playworld to start, it is about how we raise kids now. Because I think Generation X in particular is so obsessed with how retroactively they're boy, I almost got killed 73 times. So I better make sure my kid is safe. It's oh yeah, I'm really good with my kids. I give them a lot of room. I let them go get a donut down the street. I'm she's watching. There she is getting the donut. Is everybody okay getting the donut? You know what I mean? Versus showing up at 6 p.m. for dinner. It's, I don't know. It's interesting.
It's a great book. Everybody needs to get it. Tonight.
Call to action.
It's your favorite bookstore.
I want to thank you both for an excellent conversation and doing this. Thank you so much, Adam, from Claiborne too.
Yeah.
That was a great show. Thank you.